It's no more time for the excuses. Playoff season's right around the corner, and the Grizzlies just conceded the number 2 seed in the Western Conference after another fourth quarter letdown. We got to talk about these fourth quarter breakdowns. What's happening? Who needs to step up? And is there something Taylor Jenkins can change? Let's cover it all right here, right now, coming up on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host for today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to thank you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you continue to make Locked On Grizzlies one of your first listens each and every day. And remember, you can find us everywhere: Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen or watch. If you're on YouTube, your podcast, Locked On Grizzlies, is there. So we thank you for tuning in, because I know sometimes it's not easy to tune in. Sometimes you probably just want to stay away from anything Grizzlies related, and this might be one of those times. This might be one of those days. Another fourth quarter meltdown. That's 3 games in a row where the Grizzlies went into the fourth quarter in an encouraging way. And then that's 3 games in a row where the fourth quarter ended in a discouraging way. It's something that has to be addressed. It's something that may not be able to be fixed right now. And I just want to say, look, we have seen a lot of these fourth quarter breakdowns from the Grizzlies. This isn't the first time I've talked about this. My co-host Joe Mullinax has also talked about it as well. But here's the thing about these fourth quarter letdowns. A lot of times I hear you, the fan base, say, oh, the refereeing, was this. The refereeing was bad, or you point out certain plays. I'm not in the business of blaming the referees on games. There have been some blatant calls that have went against the Grizzlies this year. No, don't get me wrong. I mean, we can go back to that 5-game road losing streak in January and remember the Lakers game where there was the lane violation that should have been called on Russell Westbrook when Brandon Clark was at the free throw line, or there was the illegal screen on Draymond Green in the Warriors game in that same slate that led to a Klay Thompson three-pointer that ended up being the dagger. You can go back and pick out these little things, but at the end of the day, in each of those games, the Grizzlies controlled their destiny, so to speak. One play wasn't what did it. 2 plays isn't what did it. We just got to call it how it is. You can't just blame the referees for what's going on right now. Let's talk about the last 3 fourth quarters from my man Keith over at Fast Break Breakfast. I saw his tweet. The Grizzlies in their last 3 fourth quarters outscored by the Lakers 24-9 over the final 8 minutes. Outscored by the Clippers 26-8 over the final 9 minutes. Outscored by the Nuggets 33-17 over the final 12 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not a referee problem. That's not a problem where you can just blame 2 whistles on. That is something needs to change around the Grizzlies. And we have talked about, certain things that need to change, right? Longer minutes, for important rotation guys. Josh should not be sitting when he's active, until the 7-minute mark to the 6-minute mark of the fourth quarter. Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., all these guys should be playing, 8, 9, 10 minutes in the fourth quarter. But as I look at it deeper, those are marginal gains that can only marginally fix the problem. One thing that I don't consider a marginal gain is getting Steven Adams back. We'll talk, more about Steven Adams just throughout the course of this episode, but it's simple. Steven Adams and what he brings to the table are some of the things that this team is missing right now. The terrific screen setting. Another game where the Grizzlies were beat up on the glass. Anthony Davis, 30 points, 22 rebounds, season high 22 rebounds for Anthony Davis. And I mean, it doesn't take a, basketball expert to tell you he doesn't get 22 rebounds if Steven Adams is playing. It's that simple. I want to go a little bit deeper here, and not too deep, just let's call it how it is. That's what we're going to call this segment. This is the Call It How It Is segment today. The Grizzlies have 4 players who, you may think of as guys who tend to take shots in isolation situations a lot. There's Ja, of course, and then there's Desmond Bane, there's Dylan Brooks, there's Jaren Jackson Jr. So in terms of the 4, this is how I look at them. Ja is your superstar type closer, right? Call 12 last year was the slogan. He actually was one of the best closers in the NBA last season. Desmond Bane, not necessarily a closer, by the definition, but started this season before his injury, was averaging around 10 points per game in the fourth quarter. Playing terrific fourth quarter basketball. Dylan Brooks, one of the better, this is the misconception about Dylan Brooks, one of the better shot creators on the team. It's just when he creates the shots, he can, get to certain spots on the floor, does the turnaround jumpers. He can get to mid-range spots. He just doesn't make them. And then there's Jaren Jackson Jr., physically imposing, right? Has all the size and skill in the world, but we don't see him dominate those matchups enough. So this is what I figured out. When it comes to fourth quarter situation, I want to start here. The Grizzlies don't have enough isolation scoring. That's what it is. When you think about late games in the fourth quarter, you think about teams, they aren't hedging anymore. They aren't playing as much drop coverage. It's basically switch. I've seen some people say it's simple. Just run some plays, run some plays like you do all throughout the rest of the game. Well, when NBA teams switch, it basically takes you out of a play. And the Warriors, one of the most prominent teams, that kind of really, helped the NBA facilitate more to this switching style. When they switch so much, it takes you out of the play, and it basically forces you to attack a mismatch. If a team is going to switch a guard onto your big man, they're basically giving you that opportunity to have your big man go at that guard. Now, of course, they're going to, rotate and things like that. But that's what the switching that's the weakness of it, so to speak. But it takes you out of your play. You run plays to set screens and all these type of things, and the switching just eliminates all of that. Basically, when teams switch, which is what most teams do in late game scenarios, it leads to isolation situations. Here are where those 4 players, Jaren, Ja, Dylan, and Desmond Bane, rank in isolation scoring in the NBA in terms of percentile. Jaren Jackson Jr., 85.7% percentile, according to NBA.com here. Ja Morant is in the 34th percentile among isolation scorers in the NBA. Ja Morant, your superstar player, 34th percentile. Dylan Brooks, 25 percentile in isolation scoring. Desmond Bane, 21 percentile. It's not good. You basically have 3 guys who are in the lower third of the league in isolation scoring in terms of percentile. And these are the 4 guys who are taking the most isolation shots on this Grizzlies team. Those stats were from NBA.com. So Jaren Jackson Jr. is the one guy, 85.7 percentile when it comes to isolation scoring. So you say, hey, get Jaren Jackson the ball more. We saw what he can do. Look at the first half of this game against the Lakers. 18 points in the first half, finished the game with 26 total. But if you go back to the first half, what you noticed was Jaren Jackson Jr. got a lot of mismatches. You saw when Anthony Davis left the game for a little bit, he took over. Jaren dominated against smaller matchups. Jaren Jackson Jr. was great in this game against mismatches. But late in the fourth quarter, he was matched up against Anthony Davis a lot. Outside of a made three-pointer in the last 2 to 3 minutes, there wasn't much going to the rim from Jaren Jackson Jr. that was made. And that's because he had Anthony Davis on him. Well, you know how the Grizzlies can help out there? Force the mismatch. Think about Luka. Think about LeBron. Think about James Harden in his Houston days. What those guys did really well, they would bring the screener there and they would force the mismatch. You did not want to when the Suns last season when they played the Mavs in the playoffs. You think they wanted to switch Chris Paul on the Luka Doncic? No, you think those old Jazz teams wanted to switch Rudy Gobert onto James Harden in the playoffs during those series? You think, the Warriors, when they were playing the Cavs in the finals, willingly wanted to switch Steph Curry onto LeBron James? No. When you get to crunch time and everyone knows you're playing this switch style, they are seeking those mismatches and they're hunting them. We don't see the Grizzlies hunt those mismatches enough for Jaren Jackson Jr. because it is proven. He's in the 85 percentile. I just read it to you. It is proven. You get Anthony Davis off of Jaren Jackson Jr. down the stretch, and you have him matched up against an Austin Reeves or Brown or Lonnie Walker or whoever else the case may be, Rui Hachimura. You have him matched up against any of those guys. It's a bucket. It's a bucket. And that's where the Grizzlies have to go in that area. Jaren Jackson Jr. he's an efficient guy, but that's all I have to say about the fourth quarter meltdowns right now. It is something that, as I basically just outlined to you, those guys particularly just haven't been great in those situations this season. So it might be something that you have to fix in the offseason. I feel like that's where we are at this point with the Grizzlies in their late game situation. So that's all I have on that. I mean, it's fourth quarter meltdowns. And at the end of the day, it's something that this team will have to address in the offseason. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk about something that hopefully could be addressed in some way, shape, or form soon, and that's the status of Ja Morant. I'll tell you what we know about the latest on Ja Morant coming up, but before we get to that, I got to talk to you about one of our newest sponsors out there, and that's Ultimate GM. See, Ultimate GM is our new partner and sponsor for today's episode because it's a mobile game. And look, I know a lot of you, you try to flex your basketball knowledge. You ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your own basketball franchise? Well, guess what? Your dream can come true on this game, Ultimate GM. It's managing every strategic aspect of your own team, and you can play through the season, lead your team to glory. And here are all the things you can do. You can hire coaches, assistants, trade and train players. You can make draft picks. You can basically just navigate your franchise through free agency, the draft, all the ups and downs of the season. Check it out like this. Locked On Grizzlies listeners, you get a 100% free boost to their franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up on the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com, and go play Ultimate Basketball GM and start your dynasty. Let's see, you try to flex all your knowledge on here about your basketball knowledge. Go play Ultimate GM and show me if you can really build up a dynasty from the ground up. Coming up after break, we're going to talk about Ja Morant and the latest on his status. Ja Morant is the face of the franchise in Memphis, and the Grizzlies have played 2 games without him since he stepped away from the team, and the Grizzlies have lost both of those games without Ja Morant. And you wonder if one of them could have went differently, but the thing is, when we're talking about Ja Morant, there are larger things to talk about than basketball here. This is, as we've said time and time again, it's a young man who has a daughter, who has a family where he's the breadwinner, he's taken care of. And quite frankly, some of the decisions he's made lately and potentially could make if he doesn't, shift his mindset and his mentality, could put some of that fame and fortune that he's worked so hard and diligently for, could put some of that fame and fortune at risk. Nike endorsement, Hulu Live, Body Armor, Powerade, Beats by Dre. The Grizzlies, He has $200 million contract. 200 could be 230 million if he makes all NBA, which he, in my opinion, was on pace to do, before this entire situation started to unfold. But just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the latest. I think the last we talked, the latest on him was he was stepping away for at least 2 games. Just from hearing Taylor Jenkins talk, this doesn't sound like 2 games. And I think I touched on that before, but he talked after the Lakers game. Doesn't sound like Ja Morant will be back against the Golden State Warriors. It sounds more like the team is literally just as Taylor Jenkins said, he giving Ja time to heal. You know, so since that's the case, there is no timetable, as Taylor Jenkins said. In fact, Taylor Jenkins called it. He said it would be disrespectful to give this situation a timetable. So I think the future approach, if you've been thinking of it from, hey, what game is he going to be back? That shouldn't be the primary focus, not according to the Grizzlies, and just not according to just the morality of this whole entire situation. Ja Morant said he needed some time away. He needs some things to work on. Allow him to work on those things. Take his time away, and we'll see what comes of it. Of course, we've talked about Taylor Jenkins' support. We've talked about the Grizzlies player support. The Grizzlies have said that they've been in contact with Ja Morant every day. So that is an encouraging sign there. Of course, they're not giving too much information on what's being said in those conversations, but it seems like, the Grizzlies are keeping Ja Morant in the loop. Ja Morant's keeping in the loop, keeping them in the loop as well. And things will go from there. But it's it's a touchy topic. Ja Morant means a lot to Memphis. Memphis means a lot to Ja Morant. Someone who's covered this team over the past, couple seasons, it is something, that has a lot of weight. And when I say it has a lot of weight, I'm not talking about today. I'm not talking about next week. This is long-term historical weight in Memphis. And Ja Morant has meant as much to this city as any Grizzlies basketball players I've seen ever before. And he's only been here 4 seasons. And it feels like he's just starting to get those imprints, right? We talk about the Nike sneaker deal. We've never seen that in Memphis. I tell people, we saw Penny get his signature deal. Penny was playing in Orlando. Penny was playing, in Phoenix, and so forth. Ja Morant is here in Memphis playing with the Grizzlies. There wasn't a, Grizzlies for a decent part of, Memphis Grizzlies at least, for a decent part of Penny's career. So it's different in that way. And, human nature, you want to see that out. You want to see where Ja goes with that. And, just to see these things happen, it can be damaging. So that's something to keep in mind. And I know, some people have said things like, oh, Damichael, hold him accountable. And I think I've done a fair job with that. I think I've been very fair with saying, look, it has nothing to do with being 23 years old. Ja Morant's NBA player. He's played 4 years in the league. He has a good idea of how these things work. We've seen Ja Morant go on Instagram lives before and things like that. I'm sure there have been conversations had with him, from what I've been told, about, some of his decision making and some of the things he could do to jeopardize, some of the things he has in store for him. So with that being said, as we saw, even in Shams Charania's recent report with The Athletic, Steven Adams talked to the team about, going out and things like that. And Ja Morant, as we saw, proceeded to go out after the loss against the Denver Nuggets. And we saw what the outcome of that was. Now he's being investigated by the Glendale, Colorado Police Department. He's being investigated by the NBA. And neither of those investigations have concluded yet. So not only are we talking about Ja Morant stepping away from the Grizzlies, we're talking about an NBA investigation. We're talking about, the Colorado Police Department investigation. And I'll nip one thing in the bud. Mark Stein, shout out to him, one of the best NBA reporters, in the business, basically came out and after, there were rumors that, since Ja Morant's situation is gun related, he'd be issued at least a 50-game suspension if, it was found that he carried a gun on a team plane. That information is false. That is incorrect. That is not the case. If Ja Morant was found to have a gun on a team plane or anything, related in that realm, uh, the suspension and the validity and the totality of that suspension would be up to the commissioner, Adam Silver. So he'll determine the punishment. David Stern ended up giving Gilbert Arenas 50 games, as a lot of people seem to remember. But that's probably not going to be the case in this scenario. No matter what happens, to that situation, what happens at the end of that situation, the Grizzlies, they have to keep playing basketball. And right now, the Grizzlies have fallen into a tie with the Sacramento Kings for the number 2 seed in the Western Conference, and the Kings have the tiebreaker. We're going to talk about that coming up after the break. But before we get to that, we got to talk to you about FanDuel, because I said right now the Kings have the tiebreaker, right? You might still think that the Grizzlies will finish in front of the Kings. Well, guess what? FanDuel is the place to go. And look, at this point of the season, new customers on FanDuel, you get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That means if you bet $1,000 and your bet doesn't win, you get $1,000 back in bonus money that you can play again on FanDuel. Just download the FanDuel Sports app. Look, it's safe, it's secure, it's easy to use, and you can bet on anything. One of my favorite things to bet on is the money line, the spread. But not only that, you can take it a step further. What I like about FanDuel is the same game parlays. You can go say, hey, I project Steven Adams to get 8 rebounds. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. will hit two 3-pointers. I think Tyus Jones will score 15 or more points. I think Desmond Bane will make 3 3-pointers. You can combine that all into one big bet and get you a nice big chunk of money. FanDuel, it's the premier place to do your betting. And look, if you haven't created a FanDuel account yet, the first chance, don't miss the no sweat first bet up to $1,000. All you have to do is go to fanduel.com/locked on. That's fanduel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel. It's an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk about the standings. The Grizzlies are losing some ground, and they've succeeded the number 2 seed. Let's talk about what they have to do to regain that coming up. I looked on Twitter after the Grizzlies game, and of course, there was a lot of commentary about the Grizzlies' loss, right? The Grizzlies lose again, late fourth quarter, same thing, blah, blah, blah. All of that was a big topic of conversation. But what I also saw was a lot of Sacramento Kings fans on there. I saw a lot of Sacramento King fans. And it led me to think, okay, why so many Sacramento Kings fans on here? I mean, I knew why they were on there, but they're up watching this game, and they were happy. Sacramento Kings are the number 2 seed in the Western Conference. The Grizzlies and the Kings have the same record. Yes, but the Kings own the tiebreaker because this all goes back to that fine in the West stuff. I'm telling you, the Grizzlies have a worse Western Conference record than the Kings right now, and quite frankly, it's not close. So it's going to be hard for me to believe that the Grizzlies can make up ground in the conference record. Right now, the Kings 26-14, the Grizzlies 20-18 in conference. But what if I told you the Grizzlies still have the inside track for the number 2 seed, despite everything's going on? Yeah, I know. You're probably saying, oh, Damichael, yeah, I really don't care. But to be honest with you, it's the truth. It's the truth. the Grizzlies should and probably will still end up with the number 2 seed. Let me explain why. Look at the strength of schedule right now, right? The Grizzlies are knocking out some tough games right now, but the Grizzlies have the 28th in the NBA. Only 2 teams in the NBA have a softer schedule than the Grizzlies for the remainder of the season. This includes a game against the Milwaukee Bucks, which will come in late April. And by the way, since it comes in April, not late April, I'm sorry, early April, but late in the regular season. Since that game comes into April towards the end of the regular season, and the Bucks right now, I think they're up 2.5 games on the Celtics. If the Bucks have clinched the first seed by then, they're not going to be playing their guys like that. But anyways, 1 game against the Bucks, 3 games against the Mavs, 2 games against the Warriors, and 2 games against the Clippers. But here's the thing: 2 games against the Warriors at home. The Warriors are 7-25 at home. You got 2 games against the Clippers, 3 against the Mavs, 1 against the Bucks. Outside of that, you're talking about 2 games against the Rockets. You got the Bulls, you got the Spurs, you got the Thunder, you got the Blazers, and the Magic. All games that are very winnable for this Grizzlies team. 28th in strength of schedule remaining. You know where the Kings are? 7th. 7th in the NBA, and they have a gruesome stretch. They also play the Bucks, but they play the Knicks, they play the Nets, they play the Nuggets, they play the Celtics, and last but not least, Grizzlies fans, you might be becoming some Suns fans lately, unless they catch you, because the Suns are lurking right behind you as well. But the Kings have 2 games coming up against the Phoenix Suns, including this weekend. The Sacramento Kings' remaining schedule has a .525 win percentage. The Grizzlies, 46.3. So the Grizzlies still have the inside track. The Grizzlies, after this stretch, they played the Mavs a couple times. They played the Warriors coming up on Thursday. Once they get past this tough stretch, there will be a lot of winnable games to close out the season, and they're going to spend a lot of time at home on their own floor. With all that being said, the Grizzlies have the inside track to the number 2 seed. They have the inside track. The Kings' schedule is tough, and if you want me to just go through the entirety of it, right here, I just listed out the teams that they'll play. But just talk about this upcoming stretch, right? This is some tough stuff they got to go through. They play the Knicks tomorrow, They play the Knicks actually right after the Grizzlies play the Warriors. So the Grizzlies will play the Warriors first on national TV, and then the Knicks and the Kings will play right after that. But the Kings will be at home for that game. Right after they play the Knicks, they go to Phoenix to play the Suns, and then they play the Bucks. So Knicks, Suns, Bucks are the next 3. Then you get a game against the Bulls, the Nets, the Wizards, Jazz, all very winnable, right? After that, Celtics, Suns, Jazz, Timberwolves. Another stretch of games that, is notable. So don't get me wrong. This is still, when I say the Grizzlies have the inside track, I'm not saying that this is all a done deal. The Kings, I give them credit because I like that team. I like the offense. Mike Brown right now, I think he is one of your top, if not the top coach of the year candidate. And I'll also add the fact that we spent a lot of time talking about how a lot of the Western Conference has struggled on the road, right? A lot of these teams, the Grizzlies, one of the main ones, right? They are super good at home and they are super bad on the road. That's been a case throughout the entire Western Conference, except one team has kind of defied that notion, and that's the Kings. The Kings are 20-13 at home. They are 18-13 on the road. That's encouraging. That means no matter who they play and where they are pretty consistently going to play some pretty good basketball. So the Kings are a tough team that's very deserving of where they are right now. De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes having a nice year. Keegan Murray, the rookie sharpshooter. They have a lot of nice weapons over there. And quite frankly, the Grizzlies have the work cut out for them. But if the Grizzlies don't end up with the number 2 seed, I mentioned some of those teams that the Grizzlies play, and they have a lot of winnable games. It'll be because they let some of those games slip through the cracks. That's the only way I can see the Grizzlies not ending up with the number 2 seed in the Western Conference. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies one of your first listens. We truly appreciate it. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Grizzlies one of your first listens each and every day. But guess what? Now that you made Locked On Grizzlies your first listen, I want you to go make Locked On Game to Game your second listen here on the Locked On Network. Now, look, it's simple. Every moment, every top performance, and every result, Locked On Game to Game covers you with every game across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver for you. Follow Game to Game Locked On now. And guess what? It's available on Odyssey app, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast. You can go find Game to Game on Locked On now. We appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies, Grizzlies fans. And at the end of the day, guess what? What you should learn from this episode is, yes, the Grizzlies have fourth quarter struggles that might not be fixed this season. Yes, we don't know when Ja Morant will be back, but the Grizzlies, through all of that, still have the inside track for the number 2 seed. That is what you learned in this episode. Appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies, Grizzlies fans. Once again, I'm your host, Damichael Cole, and we'll see you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.